And we are live for episode number 9. Who knew we would be here this long, but who's going to cancel us? Nobody. So I'd like to introduce our guests. Everybody knows Matt and Mike, some of our regulars when they're here. And one of our very first guests from one of our absolute first show was Alfred Nutil. I hope I said it right. So we wanted to bring Alfred back. He got a great website where I actually follow on my RSS reader all of his content and read it. I enjoy it. I encourage you guys to check it out too. So Alfred, you were talking a bit about this podcast that you're doing. So why don't you tell me a bit about what you've been up to since the last show that we had you on?
Yeah, a lot. So the podcast was one of them, but even that got a little bit of a backseat to the busyness of work. As we all know, things you have to learn a ton sometimes and just turn it up. So I've been busy with that. But the podcast developers hangout, we're going to start that back up any day now. So that one we just go over some of the, not so much the news because everybody's doing that now. So we do a little bit of articles we've read over the past week or two and just talk about them. And then we typically jump into a topic that affects us. Like we had a 3 series on why not or why to use NoSQL. Because neither one of us, me and my friend and colleague Nathan, neither one of us used NoSQL much, but we wondered why is it so popular and how could we use it if we want to. So we did like a 3-part series on that and just talked about it as developers. So that's basically what that show's about. And been up to that and just learning stuff about AWS and Ansible and other things I'll talk about today.
That's pretty awesome. So it seems like we're going to have some competition from you. So hopefully we can share our audience and you don't take our audience. But all the same, I mean, it's more about sharing knowledge and talking about the awesome things that we can do with programmers and how and the cool things we get to do with and in our community. Another news item, we have been talking to DigitalOcean and they have told us that we can, or they have given us some swag to share with our audience. So we'll be sending out a tweet pretty soon with some details of what you can win, how you can enter, and we will go from there. Maybe you can win some credits for DigitalOcean or Plushy Shark. So check out our Twitter feed. It's twitter.com/LaraChat Slack, all one word, and you'll see some tweets there about what we're doing. And beyond that, some other news that has been happening in the PHP/Laravel world. Adam Wasson, we had him on our last show. He had a new book called Refactoring Collections. I haven't read the book myself, but I've heard some good things about it. Riz, who couldn't make it today, has read the book and talks highly of it. And you saw Mike give his thumbs up there. And beyond that, Google I/O was last week, and Alfred was making some interesting comments earlier before the show started about it. So Alfred, why don't we talk about what you brought up before?
Yeah, and by the way, Adam has videos for that book too, and one of them's free right now. I was watching it earlier. He always has some interesting points to make about coding and so forth and thinking about it. No, we were talking about Google I/O. It's like, it's easy to think it's just Google releasing cool hardware. But honestly, as a developer and someone who's in the industry and just passionate about creating things, it's like what's happening now is you have all these people not just talking about bots, but AI and in creating things around that concept, right? So, they all have APIs and so forth. So without knowing it, we could be building things that are talking to these APIs. Whether it's our website, our search results on our website, or a bot we make in Slack that's talking to Laravel backend. It's really fascinating to know this stuff is going on. And like I was saying earlier, it's like for me, the industry picked up like 7 years ago and everybody finally realized they needed a website. Now what's the next thing? And you got, HoloLens, you have VR, and you have this big movement about bots and AI or machine learning. And those things aren't out of our reach. I think every new technology that comes out is like, holy crap, what the hell does REST mean? Or holy crap, what is this thing that they're talking about, whatever. And as time settles in, it's like now we understand it, and it's not this thing that's beyond us that you need 10 years at MIT to know. So it's gonna. I'm just fascinated in trying to figure out personally what to invest my time in to get ahead of things for career reasons, but also because they're interesting. You know.
Yeah. And one of the things Matt and I had been talking about machine learning and the concept, just the term machine learning, almost sometimes implies something that is crazy hard, or you, like you said, you need to be an MIT developer, Harvard developer, someone who's crazy smart. But I started watching some videos provided by Google, either Firefox or Google did these videos, and it was incredibly simple to
Yeah.
understand. And
Yeah.
I was actually blown away that, hey, I'm not an MIT guy, but I get it. So
Yeah.
you are right. It's within our reach, and how long until we code ourselves out of a job? That
Oh
saying,
yeah. Yeah.
there's that saying, well, coders work the hardest to be lazy.
Yeah. Well, Wired had their typical catcher title, like, soon we won't need coders because the machines are just going to do it. And it just catches your attention. But I know, all right, and UML graphs will output code for us. It's like, it will never be perfect, but it's an interesting thought. Like, how far does it go,
If I can interject, I'm actually on my third or fourth book now on artificial intelligence stuff,
Yeah.
and just some of the details they talk about. But it's the first one. It was exciting because it's the first one that's talking about all the negative stuff and all the end of the world concepts and everything else. And it's amazing because what I ended up seeing was it's almost like when we start getting into that really deep layers of AI stuff, we're actually going to have to literally run it on a whitelist system. That it's like you whitelist your AI, it's allowed to do this activity, and that's it. Because the way they theorize about it, like if you create this thing that can learn how to do, let's say it's learning to play chess, well, one of its ways of playing chess is to actually cheat by damaging the other robot it's playing against. And then you tell it, don't do that, and then the next thing it's going to do is it's going to build a robot to go damage the other computer because it can do that, right? So you have to kind of you're so many steps ahead of the game, right? It's really a fascinating world.
Yeah. And it will always be steps ahead of us. So, yeah.
And Mike, I think you were making a joke to us earlier about WYSIWYG editors a couple of years ago. They were the ones that were supposed to put us out of a job, something like that.
Yeah.
That didn't really happen, and it made us, I know as a developer who had to work on email campaigns where the client was using a WYSIWYG editor to create the campaign, it actually created more work for me. So interesting thought, if the AIs and bots create more work for developers, I wonder if that would happen too.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, had been most of the news this week, and again, I encourage you guys to check out our Twitter feed to see what DigitalOcean has shared with us. Beyond that, our first topic was about Ansible, and we got Alfred on to talk about it. So, Alfred, I haven't used Ansible myself, but I have been told by some people that there's Puppet, there's Chef, there's Salt Stack, I think, and I've been told Ansible is one of the easier ones to learn. I'm curious to know or hear from you what your experiences in learning and getting started with Ansible have been.
Yeah. So when we talked about this in Slack, it's like, I'm so far off from being an Ansible expert, which is good because you get experts on a show and then you feel like, heck, I can't even do this. Like, they're way beyond me, right? So I'm coming at it from, hey, I'm a developer who was using Forge, who wasn't doing it at this level, who finally had to again, because for a while I used to. So I started in Linux years ago, did server stuff, but I never got into Chef and Puppet. By the time DevOps became the thing, I just wasn't there. I was doing PHP and MySQL stuff. So coming back to this recently, like late last year, we needed to find a tool that would help us automate a lot of these little details, like Nginx, cron jobs, supervisor, right? So some of our projects we can't use Forge, so I looked into Chef and Puppet and all these other things, and Some of them required servers in different setups where Ansible is just like, hey, run this script, right? So that was nice, and I kind of focused on Ansible at that moment. In Ansible, I don't know Python, right? So Ansible is YAML. If you know Python, you could probably go really much further, right? But I don't know any Python. I like it. I just haven't gotten into it enough, right? So here I am with YAML files, and I don't really like YAML to begin with. I feel like it's a little picky on the formatting, right? But this was just amazing. I opened up this YAML file. I Googled, like, I read a little bit of the hacker book, Server for Hackers. And it was just like one chapter. He did some Ansible stuff. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And then before long, they have a lot of documentation. If you Google Ansible module for templating or Ansible module for Supervisor D, you'll find stuff right in their documentation. So it was really easy to just move from need to need, right? So picking up Ansible, we were using Envoy. That's another one you didn't mention, right? So we were using Envoy to quickly deploy our applications. You could just type Envoy run deploy staging, and it would do all the stuff we needed to do to pull from Git, restart the Supervisor D, run any other nuances we needed to do, like Nginx and stuff. But we needed something more than Envoy. Envoy has certain limitations and things that Ansible doesn't, that can do, right? So we went with Ansible, and I was just amazed, right? So first of all, if you think about what we need, right, we're usually working with Nginx or Apache. We're dealing with getting the server just right for PHP. We're dealing with Supervisor D, cron jobs, SSL, and templating out things like, here's my Nginx file, here's my Supervisor D file. The job is pretty small. The needs are pretty small, and it just made it really easy. I had a command for cron. I could just stick things in cron, right? And I could easily say, make sure this is absent or make sure this is present. So the next time I ran it, it would remove it. I just can't say enough how easy it was. And it was really cool because I finally realized, wow, they abstracted out all of these complex or tedious server interactions into frickin' YAML, right? They had 2 lines, and I could have a cron job gone or removed. And that to me was pretty cool because we always think about coding and abstracting, and this was the ultimate abstraction, right? It's like, this will now do an apt-get for me and make sure these 5 packages that it iterates over are there or not there. So it was amazingly easy to get that going. And again, we're not doing complex things, right? Us personally, it's like we need Nginx, we need PHP the right way, we need supervisor cron, SSL, and templates. Templates being like with Blade, curly brackets. Put this Nginx file here and replace it with particular parameters I have set up. What's the domain name, or what's the path, or what's the SSL cert name? Things that might be dynamic, right? Just like Blade, you know, you have a file, has curly brackets, replaces variables, puts it where you want it. So, so yeah, that's the big overview of Ansible. If anyone has any questions so far, yep. So that's the thing too, right? So you have Ansible and you run it, and you can hit your local box, you can hit a remote box, you can configure nothing and just run it locally, right? So I can jump into my freshly installed virtual machine and I can run it, and boom, my machine's ready to go, and it matches my server, right? I could run it again and point to my server, and now I know these 2 things are perfectly matched. And kind of more importantly, I can run it during a build, so I know that the next deployment has the latest Supervisor D daemon, right? But I didn't have to touch anything on that server to get that done. It could just run it right there. So, so that's it. That's another really cool thing about it, how I could just run it locally and then hit servers as I needed to. Any questions on so far? I can keep going for a few more.
So I'm a pampered Forge user, and to me, I push to Git, everything works, you know.
I know.
How would you compare? When would you use Ansible and not Forge, for example?
When the client tells me I have to.
Okay, so it's a specific setup that the client needs that Forge maybe can't satisfy, or they don't want Forge.
Right. There's certain legal restrictions. Even though Forge can do AWS, there's certain legal restrictions or things we had to meet, which meant AWS, SQS, S3 buckets, and all these things inside the AWS environment, or DigitalOcean, right? that we had to do. Ansible, Forge is freaking awesome, right? You get your job done, you're in and out, no DevOps. I sometimes have little problems here and there, but they're fine. They're just, it's life, right? So I would say when the client's pushing you not to use something like that, then you have these tools at your disposal.
Sure. Now, have you, do you put a lot of weight or stock in having, dev parity to your production environment? Is that something you look for?
I personally do. Yeah, I think.
I mean, because Homestead is close, but it's not the same.
Yeah, close is good. I've seen things bite me. I forget what packages it was, but for some reason it needed PHP SOAP. I wasn't using it. I was talking to the Marketo API. And it was a detail, and it just got missed, and it hits the server, and boom, we were just like digging around for a while, and I just don't want to do that. And again, Homestead is making us, it makes it so easy, and I love it, right? But if you just take this little bit of time, you could spin up a VM and get it going just like that, matching the remote system, so you could be a little bit more safe. But I mean, again, Homestead is another amazing tool. So you don't want to leave that comfort, but I think it can be risky sometimes. You could use this in Homestead too. It would be hard to make sure it's a perfect match, but you could use it as part of your workflow, because like it can live inside of your, the root of your application, and when you push your application and gets pulled to the server, you could hit that file and it could verify, XML or SOAP is installed, right? So you could complement what you already have, even at the Forge level, honestly. Like you might have a Forge application, it needs a new update to ImageMagick. You guys talked about that in the last show, right? Well, you got two solutions. One I love even better, and that's another advantage. One is in your deployment, you run Ansible and it updates what you want, right? So you can use Forge and Ansible. The other thing too is you could do a cron job that checks an S3 bucket every hour for this Ansible script, so that if you want to push to 20 servers your latest fix, they all get it. And ideally, they all still work after that. But the point is, you can do that with one script. It's pretty amazing at that point.
One quick question I have here. I have used Forge. I've had a couple clients that have wanted to use it because they're not strong on the DevOps side.
Yeah.
And combined with my limited experience of Ansible, in my experience, I've always set up the server myself from scratch and dealt with all the pains and apt-get, yum, install, etc. I've dealt with all that pain, so I feel a little confident in doing it myself versus going Ansible or going Forge, etc. But what I'm curious about is you mentioned using Forge and Ansible together. Could you maybe, if you know, could you detail how they might work together?
Yeah. So two good examples, right? So I have a Forge server. That's my server. I'm responsible for it, right? So, for example, ImageMagick had an issue. They might not be updating that server, right? So my next deployment or my automatic cron jobs could pick up this script, and it could just say apt, the particular module is apt. It comes included with Ansible. Update ImageMagick, and next thing you know, ImageMagick is updated with your next build automatically via the Forge, scripting process. Because when you run Forge, it can run a script for you, and it can go through those lines, and one of them being just Ansible run, and Ansible would hit that file you pointed to and run those things. And again, another example is you're working locally and you needed a certain something that PHP didn't have by default on Forge. You set it up locally, put it in that script, and next time you deploy, it's going to be there as well. And you're right, you're comfortable with all those little tedious tasks, but at some point, your time is more important, right? So at some point, you don't want to do those 50 things. You want to just put them into this one thing and run it. And it's the same non-magic. There's no magic there. It's just doing it for you, right? So I think you could still have that same feeling of control, but get this to just automate some of these basic things. So that's some examples of how it could fit into Forge.
You mentioned that you were using Envoy before.
Yeah.
Some limitations. What were those limitations you encountered?
Well, so two things. First, to begin with, like the amount of modules Ansible has is just phenomenal, right? When you start doing things at any level, you have to deal with exceptions and everything you didn't think about, right? They now thought about those things for you. And I think that was the biggest aha. It's like we were starting to build our own little PHP environment around Envoy. We were starting to do little things we needed to do in scripts. So we had a nice system. We have some cool tools with Artisan, in Laravel, in general, right? So we get a lot done, and we can console and command line out a lot of things. But once you start thinking about how to handle all these different modules, putting cron jobs in, try doing that with Envoy. It's not easy, right? You have to, parse the cron tab script, reload things. And that's another thing. Now, in Blade will let you do this, but you have to basically update a script with particular settings. You have to pass that script over, fill in some curly bracket template variables, and then write it to the system. So, Envoy just was a little bit. It just didn't have that community in force behind it, right? The other one is just the paradigm of Envoy. It's a little bit more on the server side, right? It's like you're running this remote SSH interaction, and that SSH interaction is happening on that machine you're pointing to. With Ansible, you have this kind of back and forth where you could be grabbing stuff locally, sending them remotely, and you could do all of that again with Envoy, but it's just built in. So it did a lot for us. Envoy did us well for a year at least, and we were really pretty efficient, in our workflow.
So I'm going to hit you with two questions because it's my turn. And first question is: so you guys actually do all of your deployment with Ansible then? Like it can do the entire?
Right. No, good question. Okay. So this takes it to the next level, right? So Ansible, so we use AWS, okay? When you spin up an EC2 on AWS, they have a little section called user data where you can basically stick in all your scripts to make that EC2 exactly like you want it, right? So every time we spin up an EC2 with that set in there, we can basically, with that Ansible script, make this EC2 perfect, right? But the little bit of work we're using Ansible at that level. That EC2 is set up perfect. But the big magic for us was CloudFormation, okay? If you guys ever have like a week where no one's around and you could just focus on something like that's amazing and you just want to learn it, CloudFormation is a JSON-based tool that AWS has, and you can basically use it to script anything you want in AWS, any resource, and there's a little bit of a 1%, 2% you can't do. So we use it with one file. We can spin up our EC2s, our SQSs. We can spin up our database, our server with the user data, our roles and policies, everything in this one script. And once that's done, we can use it over and over again for every new environment. So we get staging, production, and QA needs an environment just for a moment to poke around. Boom, you have that. So Ansible filled in the blank of how do we get the EC2 just right. The rest of it was all about CloudFormation, and it's a JSON-based scripting language. It's basically this big file that has all the resources, and it can just do a ton of things. And it was a month of feeling lost in the frickin' woods of like, are we ever going to get out of this? How does this work? But when we came out the other side, we had something pretty amazing versus what we used to do in AWS, which was just click everywhere, set up things, and no consistency, nothing. The whole team was all over the place with naming stuff. So that's where we use Ansible at that level.
Totally. So the next question I have then is one of the things I encounter a lot when I'm doing like a staging deployment versus like a production deployment or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You can easily encounter a handful of environment variables that you have to configure in each instance.
Yeah.
Is it Ansible or is it more CloudFormation?
CloudFormation, yeah.
Which one do you kind of feel is more responsible?
So it's an interesting question, right? Like environment variables we keep out of GitHub to keep them safe, right? And keep them easier to be dynamic based on the environment, right? What we chose for that is a combination of an artisan command you can run. So, okay, two things. Most of your env variables you don't need, okay? They're just random information that sets up communication between your database, your queue, and everything else. Just who cares? Make them dynamic. Don't worry about them. Let the system take care of it. So that's what we do. When you build a cloud formation, it builds out most of the things you need to get a Laravel site running, database connections, SQS connections, everything. So you don't ever deal with the env file, except when you upload the file. CloudFormation has a UI that you can fill in a form after you upload the file based on the parameters you asked to be asked. And you can type in, hey, this is app foo, and it's foo-staging, and before long you have everything, the domain and everything. But you also have enough information in there to make a unique env file for that environment that it will make when you build it for production, right? You don't have to think about any of that. It moves it along for you because most of it you don't care about. But there are those handful of env settings you need, like, hey, this site talks to GitHub. It has a special key or another API. And that API and key is different than our staging and our production, right? So to do that, we have an S3 bucket and an artisan command. So the developer can push that to the S3 bucket for staging, and the Ansible scripts are checking cron, they check the bucket, they grab it and put it into the build, or during the build it moves it over. So you have this like seamless flow of custom stuff to staging, right? But the trick is, how do I know those are on production, right? So ideally during a build process you could verify, like, hey, there's 5 keys on staging, there's not 5 keys on production, something's wrong here, we need to stop the build. That would be ideal. But right now that's how we move things around, and so it's pretty much, for us, it's CloudFormation in charge. I'm going to make you say that out loud. You need to unmute your mic because I'm the only one talking, me and Matt.
What's the question, Mike?
Yeah.
Making me say it, huh? So Eduardo is asking, hi Alfred, what do you think about using Docker and Ansible together?
It's interesting, right? Docker has its own build process. It's amazing as well. It seems really well scripted. I don't know how the two would fit together. I don't know if it would be a repeat or not, honestly. I've read, I studied Docker a little bit. We spent a week or two trying to use it in our systems. We backed away for not Docker reasons, but other reasons. So it had a lot there already.
So I guess kind of some dead air there. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
What we'll do now is I'll open up the question to the community. We have people on Twitter, the Slack channel. They can send a DM to, or they can post in Front Porch, send a DM or a tweet. And if they have any questions, like Eduardo's question, then we'll follow it up at our Q&A portion of the show near the end. But what I'd like to do is get started on topic number 2, which is I will pass over to Matt. It's his forte.
Forte is not an accurate word for this at all. I think every developer is always battling with a best approach to this. But something that has always been a tough or a sticky subject for me is hotfixes. So I've dealt with projects where hotfixes, I've seen groups do hotfixes like I've seen SSH directly in, fix it while in production, then go backwards through, fix it that way. I've seen ones where they will FTP into production and fix it on production, and then go back and fix it there. I've seen, literally branches off for hotfix, which, no, this is the most challenging one, but I've seen branches off for hotfix, which get merged with master, then get merged also with develop, and then hopefully those two will realign themselves, which is like, what? Yeah. And I have been guilty of doing all of the above,
yeah,
time and time again. But I don't know of a legitimate, like, reliable way of doing hotfixes that, like, outside of being very strict of following, the hotfix patch goes out, it gets merged in with develop, gets merged in with master, and gets sent out. And sometimes that's just the reality. Like, Alvin, what do you think about that?
So coming from where you came from, we've tried it all, right? We recently a Scrum Master joined our team late last year, and he's challenged us in a lot of ways, right? One thing he brought is Jez Humble. He's written a lot about CD and CI, right? Continuous deployment and integration. And when we realized, and this freaked everybody out, there is no other branch. There's just mainline. When you just have mainline, then a hotfix is nothing new, right? If your work is based around certain practices like feature flags, any work in mainline is hidden and not breaking anything, right? So when that hotfix happens where there's a bug on production, just fix it and push it to production. And theoretically, every other developer is running on production/mainline, unless they're working on some crazy big feature, something that just couldn't be hidden in a feature flag. And so it was an interesting moment when that hit, and we're starting to appreciate that thinking. So that's the one thing now we're doing that I think feels pretty interesting, pretty reasonable.
So now, talk about feature flags, and that is, I'm gonna say that's a bit over my head for a second, but first I'm gonna say,
yeah,
like I've done things where it's like there's feature branches, and you're building on a feature branch, and then you're hoping that that's going to get merged in, develop, then master, and then that approach. But what to you is like what's your vision of feature?
Right, feature flag, stupid fancy word, right, or term, whatever, right? Basically just what you said, but instead of making a branch, you're just building that feature on mainline. So now let's think of a real, like, there's many cases, right? Let's think of a common one. Hey, they want a new button here that when they click it, it pops up in a window and asks them, do they want to sign up for our mailing list, right? So, well, guess what? No one sees the button unless the feature is on, or the feature is tied to that person who's logged in, or the feature is tied to that server's IP, right? So you as a developer are working in a way that you're not breaking anything. Your HTML is not going to break because it's wrapped inside a gate by Laravel, so it's off because the feature flag said it's off. Or your migration isn't breaking anything because you're okay with things being nullable. Your logic around this is okay with that. And you're coding in a way where you're not breaking things, right? You're committing in small, this is really key, you're committing code to mainline in small pieces that you can feel confident about because they either have tests or they're so small you get it. They're not breaking things, right? And they passed at the CI level, things are looking good. So you have those things that build in the confidence, and then you go from thinking, hey, I need a feature branch for this feature, but instead you're saying, no, I'm just going to build this feature wrapped inside of these practices.
So just I don't know if this is overlapping a question I think Mike's going to come at you with sooner than later, but
yeah, he is.
First question is, how do you manage the feature flags?
Right, no, that's perfect. What we're doing is, it's not about keeping them forever, right? Maybe there's a rule, you have 2, you have 3, ever on a site. And these are practices Facebook does, Etsy, you read a lot about them, YouTube. Etsy had a great session on this. They actually have an open source library about it, right? But you basically say, hey, we have this 1 feature flag for now, or 2, but after that, they're in the code. You remove this kind of on and off moment. And better yet, it's like, hey, this feature didn't work, it didn't sell, let's just get it out of there, right? So you're building with separation, and you're building with these practices that you could pull that out and be confident. But it's a really good point, and that's the thing we're aiming for, is we just don't have a lot of feature flags at any one moment, like 2 or 3,
So let me step back for just a second. Alternative methods like Gitflow propose to solve this.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've tried that but ran into issues before.
I think like going to production should not be stressful.
Right.
And none of those things allow that. Like, you merge crap together and you go to stage, you're like, oh, it worked. Phew. And then you're like, now I got to go production and relive that whole moment over.
Yeah.
We just want to be to that point where it's a day-to-day thing. It's common, and it's so small and in day-to-day that we're not scared to go to production. So Git flow, Git, all this stuff is amazing. The fact they can work with other people, merge code together, it's magical. I've been bitten by that magic, but whatever. Sometimes, and it's habits. Like, you're working together, I'll see you in a few days. It's like, no, I want to see your code today, 3 times today, little bits. Let's talk about it. Let's see it hit the pipeline and get tested. So it also becomes about these habits that feature flags can make bad habits with, right? Like, I'm going to work on this big feature, and you disappear in that zone for a while, and you come back, and you're like, I hope it merges in, you know. I renamed this class. I hope Bob didn't rename his class either. You know, it's like, holy crap. So
if there are 3 or 4 developers working on the same code base, and you just have mainline, each developer might have 1 or 2 feature flags. So it might be Mike feature add this.
Yeah, it depends though. Like, I think that's assuming like they're not talking every day, that they're not taking on one thing at a time, and that one thing isn't done where now they can move on to the next one. And the one thing that was done is now official, so they can remove the feature flag aspects to it, right?
Okay.
So I think you know, dealing, and again, a lot of this is like percentages. Like, most times this is true. Very few times there's a heavy change, it's not true. So we have to figure out the edge cases and deal with them as they come.
Okay.
But the day-to-day communication, the day-to-day checking in is part of this. And doing one thing at a time, a small thing, so you can move forward and call something done and hopefully move on from it.
So how do you ease into this from a workflow process? I mean, do you just set up a feature flag and then roll that live and then add the functionality inside that flag and then roll that live to make sure it doesn't break and then keep iterating?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have some libraries. We actually built one. It's out there. It needs some. We're gonna make it better because I felt like it was a little bit too static oriented because we used the Etsy library, I think it was, inside of the guts of it. But my main point is, once you get the structure, here's our feature flag library. The rest, so you kind of know it works. The on and the off, the who's logged in, who's not. Those things just work. So you go back to just writing your code, and you write it in a way that isn't going to break. Like, you know, migrations being the most common thought, or like validation. I have some examples of like, hey, if my feature flag is on, then this field is required. Else, it's not. And you can use Laravel's form validation stuff to just do kind of like dynamic validation based on certain things being on and off. And it's a short-term thing because eventually that's just going to be on, and you can leave the validation on after a while.
So you don't remove the actual flag itself after the feature goes live? You just turn it on and leave it on?
No, I would say you remove it, right? Because, like, you know, back to that button and that modal and those things that made that work, right? That was built in a way that you could quickly go back and say, I'm going to remove the gate. You know, with our library, we actually took advantage of gate, right? Laravel's gate interacts with authenticated users, both in the view and in your classes, right? So we're like, holy crap, let's tie into that, and we benefit from these like built-in functions, right? So you can immediately go back once there's sign off on that and say, okay, I'm going to remove my little gate wrapper around my button view. I'm going to remove my gate wrapper around the validation.
Okay, cool.
You know, boom, it's gone. You know, and I think these things, you know, there's so much more to this, but basically as we start to build things in smaller like in smaller kind of like beginning to end thinking, it's easier to think about coming back and removing that stuff versus like, I just spent a month building this, I got to go remove all these things, you know.
So one question I have is, I use the GitFlow workflow pretty extensively myself, and I think a general rule that I've tried to have is when I'm working on a branch, a feature branch, so let's say, or a bug fix, whatever have you, and my goal is to try and finish that portion of code as quick as I can, and doing it well. Because for example, recently I sent out, or I did my branch, and I assumed the task would take me 3 hours, 4 hours max, and then as I started coding, I realized, oh wait, I actually didn't scope it properly, and it ended up taking me 2 days, if I recall.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was out of date with the develop branch, and I had to merge and had the conflicts and so forth. Do you guys set with the feature flags, or however you're, even if you are doing a Git flow workflow, the other guys as well, do you guys set a time limit on how much it will, or how long you're going to take to do this bug fix or this feature, and break it into smaller chunks so that you're always either merging your feature into develop, or pushing your new code as soon as possible? Curious about that.
I'll jump in unless someone else wants to. I think you said it. Just keep it, keep time box yourself, right? Like, it's easy to get kind of lost and like, where did the day go, and just, by time boxing yourself and committing more often, you can do that. And it's just good habits too, because you're thinking in smaller chunks, whether you're doing that with unit test or BHAT test, you're just taking on these little pieces at a time. We all probably have watched LaraCast, right? Like, Jeffrey Wade will just do those forward slashes and start thinking steps out in plain English, and just thinking it at that level, and each one of those you can take a moment to commit back. So I like your point about time boxing too, and merging in often what's going on master in your case, right, into your dev, and so forth.
One last question on that. I use GitFlow as well, and it saved my butt quite a few times in that I would be working on a feature branch, but have hotfixes to do at the same time. And I mean, I can see where you have a main line, you can do that. You just have a feature flag around it. But there were instances where I had to go back and do a complete feature branch because I didn't need it anymore, and we changed our way of thinking. We pivoted, and that solved the solution. I can see that being problematic if you have to take out all your commits in a mainline, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, basically you're saying, hey, you just built this thing and now they've pivoted, so go remove it, right? But again, I would just challenge the disciplines or the ideas. Like, what are you building? Why is it so tied into your other code that it can't be pulled out, right? Like, there was Adam Watham did an interview with DHH recently, right? Where they even at Basecamp, they even talk about using a controller per action, right? So you don't have a controller around a resource, you have a controller around an action about that resource, right? And my point is, like, if you break up your code so it's still readable, right? But focused, then pulling it apart, I don't think it's that hard. And I think if it is, I think it might be a sign of something else. I hate my controllers when they get to be like so long. It's like, oh man, this resource has an index and then it has everything else, and it's like, I just rather have it be that one thing, So I think it's okay if you just do that. Then you wouldn't have that problem. But I totally seen the other thing too, like you said, is like, I'm on this feature branch. Oh, hotfix. Let me jump back to master, branch off to the hotfix, get the work done, boom, back into master, and deploy it. I've seen that be very successful.
One other thing I wanted to shout out with there's this article I was reading, and it's actually from 2014, and one of the titles was, and they're talking about the Git flow workflow, to be clear, that one of the sections is asking whether should master die in a fire. But it goes on and discusses, pros and cons and so forth. And one of the suggestions they made was renaming master to call it stable. And I mean, it's just a naming convention, but I'm curious what you guys think with that. Because for me personally, I've always called it master, but calling it stable, again, just naming doesn't really do anything. But curious, would you guys ever consider doing something like that?
I would, for sure. I mean, especially when it comes to like packages that are being like offered out to the public. I mean, that just sort of makes sense when like this one's clearly stable. I mean, even looking at Laravel, I mean, Laravel kind of runs a similar approach, even though the naming isn't the same, but it's the same idea behind it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like they leave master behind the moment that was done being 5.1, and then they move on. Now master's 5.2 eventually. Like, you progress, and in doing that. So we don't worry about master as much as like what you're saying. This is stable, and the other ones are there for you to use, but this is the stable of this latest, version. So it would make sense to me too to name that. One other thing though, if anyone gets a chance, right, listen to Jez Humble. Has anyone heard of Jez Humble? This guy is hilarious. So he one of his on YouTube. Don't hire DevOps, grow them was one of his YouTube videos. I listened to like 5 times. He's just really funny because he's been in the trenches. He's dealt with the enterprise. He's dealt with the common situations, and he just comes at it and he kind of challenges you to think about these other things in different ways, and they're really worth watching. Yeah, he has a website and some books and stuff too, but the video is great. He works for ThoughtWorks or ThoughtBots. And even in the video, he's like, we make this tool, but actually I'm talking about not using it. It's kind of funny how he's an interesting guy. It's a good video to listen to.
And with Jez Humble, you said?
Yeah, Jez Humble. And
Okay.
the videos on YouTube for Don't Hire, Grow DevOps. He's
Okay.
like, you're not going to find your latest hotshot DevOps. Just grow them in his reasoning behind that.
Gonna have to check that out. I'm actually curious. I have some assumptions, but I think I would like to hear what his are before I really give away my thoughts that could be very, very, very wrong. So beyond that, I think we've covered our 2 main topics for today, and some more exciting news that I wanted to share about the LaraChat future with regards to what's next? Well, what's next is we're going to be doing episode number 9 in 2 weeks, and
9 or 10?
Sorry, episode 10. Thank you, Alfred. You're my official QA tester. So episode 10, which quite a milestone, I think. The network hasn't canceled us. Beyond that, we are getting close to 10,000 Slack members, which as far as I can tell, comparing against other Slack communities, we might be the largest member base on Slack, which I think really exceeded what the Slack company meant to do with this app. It was originally supposed to be for businesses, but we kind of flipped the switch and turned it into a community. We're getting close to 10,000 users on the train of ones and zeros. We're trying to get 1,000 Twitter followers. So our next show, what we are planning to do, we are working with some other company to hand out some awesome swag and coupons and stuff like that. So keep an eye on what's coming next. We'll have some more cool stuff like this DigitalOcean deal that we just started sharing. We are also going to be launching some new stuff on the website. I don't want to give away too much, but there'll be some changes there for the better, and it'll be really exciting and awesome. So for that being said, please, everybody, talk about LaraChat, share it, let's get up to 10,000 members, 1,000 Twitter followers, and let's have a bunch of people come to the 10th show and win some stuff or do something awesome with us. I think we're only going to go up from here. And so one of the things we do at the end of our show is we segue into a Q&A section. So this is the opportunity for any of our fans or people watching or Slack members to ask their questions of Alfred or us or general thoughts about what the weather is today. So, and it's cloudy, just so you know. So one of the questions from Matt Hatcher is, if you're using feature branches, would you squash those commits when you're done with that branch, or do you leave all the commit history intact? I think I'll ask you, Alfred.
Yeah, I mean, we did the no-FF merge, so the history, I believe, I forget if we were losing it or not, but we definitely would squash the other branch, except that we were all too lazy to do it, and it just sat there. But typically we would try and get rid of all the branches when we were doing that flow. And when we did the no FF, we did that for a reason. I can't remember. I think the history was there, but it was all bunched into one instead of getting mixed back into all your other history.
And
go ahead.
go ahead, Mike.
All right.
Wait. Who wants to know about tattoos on Matt's arm?
I think Eduardo.
I'm a fan of using the keeping
Matt's
the
tattoo. You're a fan of what? Sorry.
I'm keeping the history in line, just because I can go back and cherry pick if I need to.
Yeah.
So I'll merge a branch with the history, and then I'll delete that branch. But then I can always go back still.
Is there any problems with that? It just works, right?
It just works, right? And it gives you an audit trail, kind of. I feel like when you squash commits, you lose the detail of what you actually worked on. Not because I'm not going to read it as documentation. I'm just going to go back if I need to fix something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's just personal preference.
And you get blame and everything at that point, right?
Right, I can blame somebody.
Well, it's usually me. It's usually like, oh, who did that? Oh, me.
So the other question coming from our famous internet Slack LaraChat famous Eduardo. Matt, what are those tattoos on your arm?
Okay, so there's two parts to this. There's the inner writing and the outer writing, or well, not writing. It's a phoenix. To me, it's a phoenix. The center is actually from the German coat of arms, and then this is rebirth in Anglo-Saxon. There's a long story behind all of that, and I'm not going to go down that long story because it's way too long for this chat. But yes, that is my arm tattoo.
Okay, fair enough, and I appreciate you only talking about the ones that we can see. So another question was, if Slack shut down LaraChat for having too many members, what will happen with LaraChat? And this is a topic that the core team and myself have talked about, agonized over, wondered what to do. And one of the things we are trying to do is figure out our next steps of maybe on the website there will be bringing more of a community component to the website. Nonetheless, there are Slack alternatives out there, and we can hop on one of those, but personally, I like using Slack a lot because I have other Slack chats I'm a member of, the companies I've worked for in the past and now use Slack, so it's nicely contained in one little bubble there. So that's why we're staying with where it is for now. And beyond that, I think and I hope that this community has spawned off or encouraged more paid members for developers who are parts of companies, and they come on to LaraChat, they find out how awesome Slack is, and they go out and tell their company, we got to be on this. So I'm hoping we're driving some sales for them, but nonetheless, we will do our part as much as we can to keep the community together, to keep everybody informed should we have to stop using Slack, and I hope we can continue to grow and grow and grow, but nonetheless we will, it's in our mind. We don't have a final solution yet, but something that we'll deal with it when it comes. That's a future Sean problem, future LaraChat problem. Do we have any other questions out there? Do you guys have any questions that you want to throw out here before we shut down for the night? And everybody's quiet.
No, I don't. I don't have any questions right now, but I will later.
But okay.
That's the best I can do. Yeah. Nobody's perfect.
Fair enough. So just to reiterate, we have DigitalOcean, who sent us some awesome coupons and swag and credits, and so check out our Twitter, check out our in the Slack channel, we're mentioning it, and then beyond that, 10th show coming up next. 1,000 followers, 10,000 members. Let's tell your friends. Don't tell your parents, unless they're developers, but you know. Beyond that, I want to shout out to Matt Hatcher as always. He's our Twitter communications extraordinaire, handling the questions that are coming and sharing what we're talking about so that we can focus on the talking. And beyond that, also thank you for Alfred for coming back onto the show and giving us some incredible information about Ansible, feature branches, and so forth. And of course, Mike and Matt, you guys are usually always here, so thank you, but that's all I need to say about that. So that concludes our ninth show. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.